I've played tons of NES games, not as many as I would like, but enough to know what I expect from the system and to make an episode talking about 10 more NES games that you should check out. Now bear in mind, these aren't the best 10 games on the system. That's a very silly subjective way of thinking. Instead, these are just 10 games that I absolutely adore, and I feel that you might like as well, if you give them a chance. Let's begin. Whew! Starting off hot! I know a lot of you will not enjoy this game. The soundtrack alone will make you want to slam your head in a car door, and I understand why. It's a horrible soundtrack for the game. It's just a 10-second jingle that just perpetually plays in your ear. Now, if you can look past that and understand the core design of the game and how to play it, it's shockingly fun. I personally hated this game for a very long time. Then I played Ys on the Famicom, and it opened me up to the idea of action RPGs in this style, at least where they had their earliest roots. The game is simple: grind, 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 and grind some more, fighting enemies in a very specific way to boost your vitality and attack power. Then you just push through the game. Don't let others dissuade you from checking this out. It's a genuinely good time, and if you need to, just use a walkthrough. Now, the most recent iteration of this was a remake, Virtual Highlight, and yes, it does suck, and there's nothing I can say or do to save it. T&E fucked it up. This was suggested to me by a former moderator on my channel, Guilty Slug. Kickle Cubicle is an IRAM title that originated in the arcades. Now, I've never actually played the arcade version, but I can with confidence say that Kickle Cubicle on the NES is a massively fun time waster. We control Kickle, and the whole idea is that we need to collect red dream bags. Kickle has the ability to breathe ice, so we have a way of defending ourselves, and because the enemies we freeze turn into blocks, we can then use those blocks to bridge holes in the floor. It's a pretty cool mechanic. The biggest challenge is just trying to figure out how you want to address the puzzles. It is tremendous fun to me, and if you want a slightly harder challenge, you can try the Japanese version. It does have more enemies. Contra is a rite of passage, not only for the run-and-gun era, not only for the Konami library, but on the NES as a whole. Contra has us playing as Bill Riser and Lance Bean going up against the Red Falcon organization. We fly over to New Zealand and prevent their plot to wipe out humanity. Now, I've played this in the arcades. It's a motherfucker. I've played the DOS version, Grisor. It's a motherfucker as well. Then they hit a sweet spot on the NES version. The power-ups, the physics, the difficulty, it's a nice balance that is even further enhanced by having a friend playing with you. Yes, it is unfair, but that's what the Konami code is for, right? The most recent game in the Contra series is Contra Operation Galuga, which is a badass reimagining of the original game. There's tons of upgrades, and I actually look forward to playing it. This is another game that gets a bad rap because it's very vanilla in how it's presented. If you happen to own a Macintosh computer in the 1980s, then there's a good chance that you may have run into this game. It's a point-and-click adventure created by ICOM Simulations, and in the game we play as Theodore Ace Harding, who's a retired boxer working as a private eye. It's a pretty film noir idea, isn't it? On the PC version, Ace has dementia. Well, he's been injected with a drug that makes him slowly lose his mental capacity and effectively become a vegetable, and yes, it mentions that in the game. The good thing about the NES version is that we don't have to worry about those silly black and white graphics, and we don't have to worry about the vegetative status either, which is sort of refreshing because this game can be cryptic at some points. Well, that's kind of a lie. You can still die at a certain point because of the whole drug, but you really have to go out of your way to not solve your amnesia to get to that point. If you like unique point-and-click adventures, this is worth checking out. It did have a sequel with Déjà Vu 2, Lost in Las Vegas, but the only home console port it received was the Game Boy Color. I love Jackal. Jackal is one of those games that just brings you joy. I don't know how else to explain it. For the most part, it's a one-to-one conversion of the Konami arcade game, but without the Konami's cursed hard game overs if you aren't good enough and still have the money in the machine. Which is bullshit, by the way. In the civilized world, we call that fraud, Konami. Anyway, in Jackal, we control a Jeep that has a gun mounted to the top of it. We blow up buildings, and we rescue POWs and bring them to the helipads, all while dealing with a non-stop flow of enemies that are shockingly satisfying to destroy. By the way, if you rescue POWs, your attack power goes up or gets upgraded, which allows you to take advantage of the enemies even more. Plus, if you want to play this with a friend, it becomes even more fun. This is a wonderful time waster on the NES. For many of us, Super Mario Bros. Was the first game we played on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was the go-to game, and it was the start of a new generation of gaming after the industry crashed. It's a rite of passage, no doubt about it. It showcases what the NES was generally capable of, and I'm sure it blew people's minds back in the day, but by the time I was able to check it out, Mario 3 was already dragging its nuts across our foreheads, so yeah. This game continues the events of the original Mario Bros. In the arcade. Now you might be saying it's an arcade game, it doesn't have a plot. Well, it has a small plot. It's not very plot heavy, but it boiled down to Mario and Luigi taking on their plumbing duties while killing enemies, no more no less. That transitioned to them taking a mysterious pipe and ending up in the Mushroom Kingdom. Driven by duty or some unyielding want for some Princess Toadstool booty, they go up against Bowser's minions, kicking the shit out of everyone they encounter before fighting Bowser and rescuing the princess. It's a super simple formula that's worked for years for Nintendo. I'm not a huge fan of Mario 2. I think I've made that pretty clear. I much more prefer Mario 3 because it just felt like a much more polished game, and in many ways, it was. Introduced to the American audience through a cult classic film in 1989, The Wizard, Mario 3 is a very special game to me because it's one of the first ones I ever played, and in my opinion, it aged tremendously well. Much like before, we're in the Mushroom Kingdom, but Bowser, being a total shithole with a weak pullout game, sends his 7 kids to take over the 7 kingdoms, turning all of their respective kings into animals. We need to destroy each Koopaling and get the magic wand to revert those kings back to normal. Then we work our way through each of the realms and use Bowser's blowhard ostentatiousness against him. It's a good game. I love it. Super Dodgeball belongs to the Kunio-kun line. For those of you who don't know what the Kunio-kun franchise is, it started with Renegade, but it really took off with River City Ransom, and once that did fairly well, they started keeping the same art style for games like Nintendo World Cup and Super Dodgeball. Now in Japan, Super Dodgeball was released as Neketsu Koko Dodgeball Boo, primarily in the arcades, with a US revision known as Super Dodgeball, but when it came time to port it, they took the arcade version in Japan and renamed it to Neketsu High School Dodgeball for the Famicom. However, in the US, they made it like a World Cup international teams kind of thing, likely because it just made more sense culturally. Because it's a Kunio-kun game, it's incredibly violent in the most silly way possible. Like, our objective is just to ping the shit out of people with a dodgeball and knock everybody out. That's it. Win the World Cup. You might be surprised to see this one on the list, but in my opinion, which might not very well be a decent opinion, you might say I'm stupid. You might be right. I probably am, but I actually enjoy these. The true issue that I have with them is that depending on which version you play, you will need knowledge of that era and that demographic. That's just something you have to contend with. There are 4 versions. The first is Wheel of Fortune in 1987, and it's very straightforward. It's asking questions like you would see on the TV show at the time. Then we had Family Edition in 1988, which was meant to be played with families, so the clues were more diversified to appeal to the audience. Then we had Junior in 1990, which had a demographic of 5 to 12 years old. And then Wheel of Fortune featuring Vanna White in 1992, and it looks dumb as fuck. I actually preferred the first one. If you want to veg out on trivia, this is one of the ways that you can do it. I know this game does not stand out, and I know that this list has probably been a little bit more normal than what you might expect, but if I have 10 games that I've beaten and I rate them a certain way, then I make sure to make one of these videos. It's the least I can do. I've talked about Duck Hunt more than I probably should have, and I apologize, but in my opinion, it's a great game to play with your family, and there's something oddly satisfying about moving the ducks away from your overzealous 4-year-old with a second controller. Rounding off our list today is the big daddy of Contra, Super C. If you liked Contra, you're going to absolutely love Super C because literally anything and everything that Contra did well was multiplied tenfold to give us an in-your-face, difficult, but ungodly fun experience. But one thing I never understood is that Konami really didn't like keeping the code that made Contra interesting, did they? In Japan, Super C had a 30-life code. In America, it was a 10-life code. Well, I guess I'll just go fuck myself. Kind of mean, Konami. Kind of mean. By the way, I do want to point out that there are different versions of Contra. In the US, we had Contra and Super C. In Europe, we had Probotector and Probotector 2. I've actually played both variances to completion to see what it was like, and I think it's so interesting to see the humans swapped out for robots. It almost feels like a different game. Plus, if you play the NES version of this in comparison to the arcade version of Super C, you get extra stages, 3 to be exact. They're left out of the arcade game. So feel free to check it out, you won't be disappointed. I hope that I get a chance to check out more NES titles, but for now, I'm working on PC games. I'm actually having fun checking out the evolution of computer gaming, and if you've been watching me lately, we just beat Tomb Raider, thank God, because I'm fucking done with that game. For those of you who don't know that I do stream every Sunday to Friday around 9 p.m., but I have to get kids to bed, so sometimes it gets a little bit crazy. I might start a little bit later. If you like this video, feel free to hit that like button because it lets Konami know that I love their games. Sometimes. And down in the comment section below, feel free to tell me some of your favorite memories involving these games. I'd love to hear them. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.